Hello and welcome to Financial Technology Frontiers Live. We are in for a great discussion in the area of payments. And this time around, we are visiting a wonderful country called as Sri Lanka, which has pioneered in payments quite early, as close as 2006 by starting LankaPay. And then they got into the trajectory of accelerated payments and then brought in a lot of interesting innovations, which later on transformed the Lanka Clear into Lanka Pay and brought in a lot more innovations, digital payments, connecting networks across countries, and trying to facilitate payments and bring more and more payments into the cashless zone from the cash zone. The country today is working with a lot of interesting players globally as well as within local and have tied up with international networks to facilitate payments. We would love to know a lot more about LankaPay and the kind of initiatives that are driven by the Sri Lankan payment systems. And with us, we have Mr. Channa de Silva, who is the CEO of LankaPay, and he is going to share with us some wonderful insights into the world of payments in Sri Lanka, where they are heading into, what kind of bottlenecks are being observed, what kind of gaps are seen, and how are they working on it, and what are the trending technologies where LankaPay is working on in the near future. Mr. De Silva, welcome to Financial Technology Frontiers Live.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Superb. Mr. De Silva, how have you seen this payment industry evolve in Sri Lanka, and what is the status of payments today?
In terms of the payments industry, I think we have certainly evolved. In terms of the evolution, what we are seeing is, decades ago, the checks, being the primary instrument, then moving into the ATMs and the cash, and going to digital. So we have gone through that experience, and also in terms of not only the ATMs, it's also the card base. So predominantly, I think from a technology perspective, the presence of cards in terms of payments have been there for a couple of decades in Sri Lanka. And from if you look at from a sort of a demographic perspective in Sri Lanka, it's kind of interesting and slightly different to other, because you can't really compare two countries together because the demographics and the contexts are different, right? So I would say Sri Lanka is sort of a well-banked country where pretty much a larger segment of the population actually have a bank account. Some countries have a big different problem where they don't have bank accounts, but we do. So technically, people have bank accounts, but the problem for us has been people not putting their money into the bank account. They have a bank account, but not putting money. And because of that, carrying out digital transactions has been difficult, because obviously you need to have money in the bank account or your card to make a transaction. So our challenge has been to get people to move into digital and also putting their money into the bank account. I mean, when you are moving them into digital, that will happen because they will not be taking the cash out. So in that sense, we have gradually looked at different market gaps, which sort of put roadblocks into moving people into digital. One of the biggest problems, the use of cash has been obviously, prevalent for decades, right? And people are used to using cash, and people didn't really find it difficult. When you compare our countries to some other countries where, say, for example, if you take some of the African countries, they don't have banks, they don't have ATMs. So people did not even have a choice to take cash out. Whereas in other countries, you walk out of the house, there's ATM, there's a bank, right? And getting access to cash was not a deal breaker. So because of that, moving them away from cash has been a bit of a challenge. So we had to come up with new innovations to make it simpler, make it more convenient than using cash to move people, instrument to move people away from cash. Generally, the lack of creditworthiness of especially the SME sector, because they are dealing in cash, and the social impacts that it brings when we move them into digital. So but those are sort of more theoretical kind of concepts. The actual problem is how do we move them. So in order to move them when it's a cash prevalent country, We only way is to through technology to make it simpler and make it more convenient, and to move, and by doing so, showing them the benefits. So I think that has been sort of the line of thinking where we looked at sort of the technology roadmap and said, how do you make it more user friendly? How do you make sure that a customer who's actually dealing in cash will move because he or she will see a benefit in terms of convenience, maybe lower cost. They don't have to travel. The advantages that bring together. So I think most of our technology deployments over the past maybe 5-6 years have been to see, I mean, is there a gap in consumer behavior to address that, and how can technology help? So some of our rollouts of technology has come through looking at from a consumer perspective, whether it's a business or whether it's an end user, a citizen. What are the roadblocks for them, right? I mean, because if you are to move them, you need to provide a solution to their problems. So that's the sort of the line of angle that we have looked at, and addressing the user experience has been sort of our core mantra to sort of deploy technology. So that's sort of has been our roadmap.
Superb. Of course, one is elevating experience, the other is bringing mandates from the government, and the third one is also bringing in kind of incentivization of using the networks. And fourth is natural causes like COVID or any of these kind of things that have come out of the air, which anyways act as an accelerator. These are some of the global experiences that we have had, and I'm sure that you're working on it. Now, when it comes to technology, what are the kind of technology gaps that you see today in payments, and how are you working towards it? Or
Yes. So I think we have had a kind of a different problems than, because some of the regional countries, there had been a real government push and mandates, and taking cash out, give people really a chance to deal in cash. When they had to move. For example, one of the problems that we faced was we had ride sharing companies coming into Sri Lanka, one sort of Uber kind of countries, and we had local ride sharing. The problem there was actually when you look at those, when you try to make a digital payment to some of these people, they used to cancel the ride if you pay with a card or a digital payment, because the problem for them was, end of the day, they needed cash to go and buy vegetables, right? So we can convert these people through technology into digital, ride sharing, but then the payment part didn't happen because they wanted cash, because for them to live. So in order to solve this problem is to also digitize that I would call micro merchants or individuals,
absolutely.
who are at the other level of the business, and who are actually selling day-to-day, groceries to vegetables to other things. Also bring them, because if you don't bring them, these guys will not move because they need cash, right? So it's a vicious cycle, and the cycle breaks. So that's where we like introduce the QR, which is basically a sticker, just a grocery seller, which sort of completed that, because most of these people are not going to have a POS machine. I mean, obviously, some of them don't even have power, right? So we looked at some of these, and also again moving them into digital. I think you touched on this cost factor, right? Because obviously, card transactions cost about 3 to 3.5%, especially that, and then especially for the SME, the small time merchants, can't deal with that. So either it's free or so we have sort of brought it down to like 0.5%. In the QR space, which is technically not a deal breaker. Again, through technology, because the point there is the merchant doesn't need a smartphone. Only the consumer needs a smartphone, accessing a QR. So in that sense, a segment of, maybe the small time merchants, the vegetable seller may not need a smartphone, may not have a smartphone, but they can always facilitate a transaction for consumers who have a smartphone. So which was sort of the line of thinking for us. And we really didn't want to looking at only, entire population of smart and analog phones, because the problem is, what we felt was the people who were most likely to come on board digital were the people who had smartphones. And then at least if you could get the majority of them, I mean, which is the 80-20 rule, then the rest will migrate to smartphones in the next 5 to 10 years.
So one more interesting thing you spoke about when during some of our earlier conversations is about making LankaPay as the single, pipe through which the international payments can connect to the entire country. Okay, you also spoke about things related to the, creating a digital KYC or a kind of total customer information across the board. So, what has been some of the opportunities and bottlenecks in this area?
If you tackle first the international connectivity. So one of the problems that we faced was different countries were using different standards, right? We are working with, India, China, so many like Nepal, multiple countries to see, because from a contextual perspective, one of our primary revenue earners is tourism. So if the tourists cannot come to Sri Lanka and make a payment digitally, then that's sort of a deal breaker. And the deployment of point of sale terminals is fairly limited in the country, right? We only have less than 100,000 terminals for the entire country, and some of those point of sale terminals are stacked at supermarkets, larger shops. So if you really look at the retail, the smallest groceries, we don't have point of sales. So even if the customer has a card, they can make a payment. So that's where, deploying the QRs and other things. So what we looked at was rather, when we are linking, we didn't really want to make any changes on either side. So that's where we said, okay, you use one standard, you use one technology on your side, we use a different standard, we use a different technology. How do we create the marriage without actually making changes? So that's where we did was we worked with sort of a middleware where we just do the format conversion so that a customer from another country can come here and scan a QR without, them having to change their app or the standard, or us having to change the app or the standard.
You brought in a priest to do the marriage between both of you.
Absolutely. Because we are also trying to connect to the ASEAN in a similar manner and make that integration. The second part is, I think you touched on the KYC segment. So one of the bottlenecks that we are seeing is we don't still have as a country digital ID. I think India went straight ahead with the Aadhaar system kind of thing. We don't have that. But I think even though we do not have that, I know even in India, UPI doesn't really depend on Aadhaar. I mean, they basically work through the banking system. So what we took that example, and what we felt was, since most of the customers are banked, they have bank accounts, which means they have been KYC'd by somebody as of now. So if we can bring this KYC together in a shared KYC, where that can also in a two-pronged way. One is, if you want to open a new bank account, you don't need to share the KYC again, which is basically the sharing of the KYC. Second one is, since the authentication information is with one bank, some bank, where your account is, why can't you use that through the shared KYC to do the authentication, which is fairly doing the same work similar to the digital ID. I mean, we will have digital ID, but we don't know when. Let's the financial sector get together and come up with a mechanism to solve people's problems. I mean, that is sort of the line of thinking that we have looked at.
Interesting. Another important milestone in all these payment success is basically the security part of it. So what are the security challenges you have seen, and how are you overcoming, and what are the new areas where you would like to probably look at?
So I think from a security perspective, we have also followed most of the international, like the PCI certifications to ISO standards and all that. So in that sense, there are certain controls and other things. Even central bank has brought in certain controls like baseline security standard for banks, the mobile payment apps, the security audit. So those things are happening, right? But that's from a high level. But in terms of the majority of the challenges that we are seeing, especially in the digital space, is social engineering. It is a worldwide phenomenon where the fraudsters are sort of getting all the personal information, including the OTPs or the one-time passwords, and carrying out financial frauds, right? And these are some of the real the problem is, those are not really security problems. Those are actually people problems, which converts to a security problem and a financial fraud, right? I think that has been our biggest headache. How do you minimize? I mean, the problem is, you might be able to do all the biometrics and all that, but if somebody steals your identity, right? So those are some. So that is where we are also trying to sort of look at better, maybe the facial recognition to that type of technology where we can, and also maybe because actually most of these things happen through smartphones. How do we do mobile number, mapping? where we can actually block some of the transaction if the number which is at the bank doesn't match with the device that is using, kind of different things. So that those are areas where we want to, because on one side we are encouraging people to come on board, on the other side we are saying, hey, wait, don't do this, don't do that, because fraud. Are we taking the right message to the market?
In fact, couple of things that would be very interesting to know here is, first is the customer education itself, because
Yes.
till the customer is educated, he will definitely fall prey to the to most of the things. Probably the banks can come together, form a consortium to create a education campaign for the customers, especially in the middle.
Absolutely. So another actually challenge, I think, I'm not sure whether it's unique to Sri Lanka, but one of the challenges is also most of the mobile customers, I would say more than 90% is prepaid, right? So some of the challenges that we are seeing is they are running out of data, right? And at the time of carrying out a financial transaction, if you don't have data, then the transaction doesn't go through if it's online. So that's where we have been sort of more looking at more offline, secure type of transactions to carry out, because of the context. Colombo or primary urban cities, some places the signals don't work, especially if you have high rises and so on. So that is where an opportunity is. How do we contextually, make sure that the transaction doesn't fail for any reason? I mean, if you don't have money, obviously it'll fail. But if you have money, how do you make sure that the consumer experience continues rather than because of a technical reason? So that's where we have looked at sort of offline kind of transactions where you have a smartphone but you don't really need online to carry out the transactions, like stored value type of thing. So that's where technology we are looking at, because I guess when you look at some of the other countries, those are not the problems they have. They have different problems. But I think from a regional, I mean, collectively, our region also, most of the countries have these problems. So that's why I think when you are looking at it, we want to look at contextual problems for us, and then how can technology solve?
Do you also face problems where you have to transition from one particular legacy of technology to the digital transformation technology? How do you modernize yourself?
Absolutely, those are problems. I mean, bank side, if you take, core banking upgrade takes, a couple of years, right? And they can't do anything. So they are what we have really looked at is more of a ESB type of solutions where the front ending, connectivity will happen, and the back end, changing of systems, can be done without actually disturbing the consumer experience, right? So that's where we have looked at even in the international speed. We are looking at a more of a middleware of front ending, so that the changing of backend is not a problem. I mean, changing of backend will have to happen, but then that won't disrupt the ongoing experience and the activity. So that's something we have sort of looked at. How do we make sure that the consumer experience, whether it's a business or a citizen or an individual, their experience is not compromised because of the technology changes in the backend.
Now, coming to the trending technologies and technologies of the future, what are the technologies where you see a lot of promise?
What we are really seeing is even for us, right? I mean, even though we have done a lot, we are still a cash-rich country, right? I mean, I'll quote you few statistics. We have a publication from Central Bank called Payments Bulletin. It's a public domain document which is available on their website. As of their last report, Q3 2023, cash in circulation is 1.1 trillion. That is not the problem. The problem is 75% of that cash is with public.
Oh,
right? Okay. Only 25% in banks, right? So our issue is, how do we bring this cash into banks? Only way is to move that into digital, right? So in that sense, what are the technologies which will bring cash into digital? Is our problem. So in that sense, that is where we need technology where it would convert consumers away from cash into digital, and also make sure that the banks and other financial institutes have technology to make sure they capitalize once the consumers move digital, offering them different varied experiences of digital lending to other things, right? So we need to have both these things, not just bringing the consumers to digital, but also can these guys offer some of the digital services by analyzing the data to so many other things how do you sort of provide a better consumer experience? So I think the technologies on either side will have to come together. So bringing consumers onto digital is one, but once they come on board digital, I mean, having payment is only a small part of somebody's life, right? I mean, the
Correct.
bigger experience is how do you get a loan? How do you buy a house? How do you buy a car? Can those experiences, also become seamless? And that is where actually one of the advantages that we have. We run a digital certificate solution where we are a certificate service provider. We have brought in digital signatures to automate the document flow as well. So if we look at a payment is only one segment, but you have to create an invoice, you have to get a purchase order, all those things. If they are manual, just doing the financial transaction digital, it's not good enough. So that is where we have looked at, can we automate that segment where, I mean, one of the examples is we have automated the document submissions to customs to digital signatures, where you can actually submit your documents and also you can make a payment digital. So unless you bring that entire value chain of, because if you're in business, I mean, you can't have barriers. I mean, if you are to run efficient, you can't have one department, going digital and another department analog, right? I mean, or not digital, and then the whole user experience. So that's where we have looked at the entire value chain to see how do you make a consumer or a business transaction entirely digital rather than some manual, some digital. Unless we actually bring all those in, we will not really see the great adoption unless there is a government mandate and push and other things, which, in a current economic context, I don't think that will happen.
Superb. Wonderful. I think it has been a great conversation there. Thank you very much, Mr. De Silva, for this wonderful conversation with us.
Thank you, Mr. Nair, for having me. Thanks a lot.